Is it elitist that black NBA players get daily CCP virus tests, but Africans living on $2 a day must pay if they can't even get one? There's been a lot of talk about the inequalities occurring in the world and the representation and in the effect of the CCP virus that's going on right now in the current pandemic. And there's many issues to that. And in most cases, I have some frustration with a lot of people when they talk about these Black Lives Matter things. I'm going to talk about specifically the NBA here, and I'm going to be reading you something about something that I think, as my friend pointed out in his comment that he posted this with, and he said, hot take, analysis will ultimately show that the death toll due to ancillary causes will far exceed that of the virus, hunger, suicide, etc. The popular delusion of the day that we can reduce risk to zero is a very deadly delusion. So with some of these things, I've been wondering, when I look at things predominantly in the United States of America, which is, if you are listening to this, chances are you are involved in the media sphere that the United States of America dominates, of the West. No matter where you are, even in Europe, which is considered part of the Western world, it's dominating. Now I understand why you can be mired in this environment and look out and just ignore the majority of the world's population. And that's what you see when I see someone like LeBron James, who is the best basketball player playing right now. There's people who discuss, is he better than Michael Jordan? You can debate that, but I think he actually probably is. But he's also better than Michael Jordan because there was Michael Jordan before, and you could learn from what Michael Jordan did and had him as inspiration. And there will be somebody in the future who's better than LeBron because they saw what LeBron did and was able to do the same thing. So these are the things. That's the way the world works. And that's also why I'm hoping my response to my friend commenting this was there's going to be analyses on these things and the things that actually happened. And they're going to go back. Enough people, the way information has been controlled and given to the public, it's not going to be considered part of public discourse anytime soon. People are controlling what you hear and what you don't hear about certain things. Even if you don't control that, it goes further than that, where you just live your day-to-day life and some things are just not going to be that important. Your average person dealing with the issues that they're dealing with in inner city Chicago does not care about what's happening in Nairobi, Kenya, and they have no reason to. None whatsoever. Somebody there might know me somehow, and they might listen to this, but on their day-to-day life, even if they saw a news article with something about what's happening in Nairobi, like this article that I'm going to read you, why would they care? So I get that. But people also want to have this global effect. They want to find ways to help things in different ways. And since the start of this, I've had some very early videos talking about how there's going to be some people who, no matter what happens, they're going to say, it would have been worse if we didn't do these things that we did. And then other ones are going to say, it's worse because we did these things that we did, without actually using the evidence. There's going to be people who make those decisions and they just stick with it. But I am confident that the powers that be that control information are losing their ability to do that. And there's people who want to do well, who want to do good things, who for some reason or some other, maybe they hear this video, this is the first thing they hear after 20 other things that finally makes them actually think, oh, maybe I should care about this the next time it comes around, because it's not just about me. Or they might be able to see what happened in their location and with something that has been so ubiquitous, that word, I struggle with that word a bit, ubiquitous, as it's in everywhere, where this thing has affected pretty much everybody. Even right now in North Korea, supposedly Kim Jong-un is in a coma right now and it's been passed on to his sister, but you don't get information from that. So people, even stuff like that, they'll be able to see, okay, look, this is a place where no information is told. How did the people behave? Did that mean it wasn't affecting this place? Here in the United States of America, we've had so much information, so much testing, like these people in the NBA bubble. They're getting tested on a regular basis. So if somebody leaves the bubble or someone comes in or they get it immediately, they find out immediately. Versus you go to like a regular high school in your area. They're maybe tested once a week, if that. How much do they move around in their different bubble? Do they find out the things? Let's say there's a professional basketball team in Italy, or let's say it's here in Africa. There's a professional rugby team. How often do they get tested? So does that stop the league? Do you need to have a bubble? So there's many ways people can compare and contrast. I think this is a Rosetta Stone of human society, human knowledge, that will get people to think about things and be able to relate and say, okay, we actually did things better here. or they were able to do that there because of certain realities about their culture and their society that don't necessarily apply to us here. So these are the different things. And then we can also just see, I think people used to speak, some people spoke about globalization, but they didn't necessarily understand, have a way to actually figure this into what globalization actually is. So anyway, reading the article, then I'll have some more comments at the end, probably through that reading as well. This is from World Magazine. This is world.wng.org. This is apparently a Christian site. I checked one of the articles. I like double checking with these news sites or other sites just to see what they're about. And it says something about world leaders here typically surprised. It said the idea for this magazine was based off of a ministry to children, talking about the mid-1980s. They tended to be buoyant years for theologically and politically conservative Christians. Ronald Reagan was moving to second term as president. The Christian school movement was growing, and homeschooling was beginning to take off. Yeah, I don't know why there's such a big connection between homeschooling and Christianity. I don't know. Was beginning to take off. Conservatives were claiming leadership roles in Southern Baptist journals and a fledgling Presbyterian. So they just said with that, they decided to kind of focus this on the whole God thing. So I don't know. And I've had separate videos talking about this. Is the coronavirus part of God's plan? Like to kill all these people? I mean, he could stop it technically, according to most Christians, but he's not. So is this part of his good plan to get people to paradise and heaven and sort out the wheat from the chaff? I don't know. But let's just read the article. Okay, hunger in the years of pandemic. A dangerous food crisis mounts for the world's poor amid pandemic restrictions. And here they happen to show an image. Now, I don't know if this image might have appealed to me in some way, because there is something where, when I talk about races, black, white, when they talk about that, I talk about that's a specific tribe in the United States of America that is not really defined by genetics in that sense. You have to have some part of Negro genes, but when it comes to black, when you come to Kenya, people don't just consider themselves black in general. They consider themselves of their tribe. And then even when you go to the tribes, in general, the Kenyan tribes look somewhat different from the Ethiopian tribes, from the Somalian tribes, from the Sudanese tribes, from the Tanzanian ones. There is a difference. So maybe when I saw my friend post this could have been something that stuck out to me from being familiar with seeing these sort of faces, even though I couldn't completely identify. Like many people who live in Kenya, my parents, for example, they grew up in the village in Kenya. So they grew up around Luya people until they were in, I think, their teens and stuff like that. Of course, there was people traveling, but that was back in the 50s. So that was before there was as much travel in that area. So once they left those areas and went to college and things like that, they started seeing other tribes. But they're very capable to see someone like, okay, that's a Kalenjin, that's a Luo, without even telling the names. They can tell from just looking at certain features. I can't, but I can in general tell, like, okay, that's someone from around here. So maybe something appealed to me, these faces. Because in this image, and I'll leave the image on the screen right now, it's some people here from hungry residents of Kibera slum in Nairobi, Kenya, stampede while seeking a planned distribution of food on April 10th. And for me, this is one thing that I just thought of as soon as early in the point of these things. Once they started these shutdowns and doing plans like, oh, we're going to give people a living wage. There's people getting paid $600 a week in the United States of America to not work. Like, you can't do certain things like that in other countries. It's just not the ability. Leave the fact that they don't have the ability in Kenya to just print money like the United States of America can when they do the whole like fiat currency and being the dollar being the main currency in the world, being the reserve currency of the world. There's issues that go with that. But just this structure to get this money out, can you identify the people? How are you going to spread it? Who are you going to know? Who has it? How much money is actually available to do these things? And you look at the struggle that these people are going through just to get their small planned food distribution is tough. And that was one of the big things that I was like, okay, it's going to be harder to inform the people about the actual threat, to test the people if there is an actual threat that's been found, to convince them that the threat has actually ended, to give them an actual way to actually get the things you think they need in order to do that. And then it's rather frustrating. Kibera slum, for those of you who don't know, is one of the biggest slums in the world, if not the biggest slum. Up to 1 million people that live in Kibera slum. And these are people who are living in that world poverty rate, not the first world countries, United States of America kind of poverty rate where you still have running water, electricity, internet, a TV, in some cases a car, a multiple. It's not that kind of situation. You're talking about some places still in corrugated metal like huts and things like that. You're trying to get some power line by maybe getting a wire illegally or just clandestinely off the poles there. Fires break out in these places. There's open sewage and things. It's a rough kind of situation. They're trying to improve the place, but for many people, it's in very dire straits, and that's just the life that they live. And these are just people being trampled as they try to get these things. So in Nairobi, some of the ones they had in Kenya was locking down the three major counties. We had the big cities. Mombasa is the coast city. Nairobi is the capital city. And then Kisumu is the second biggest city, if I'm not mistaken. Those counties had some limitations on travel in and out of those counties for a couple of months. And they've had this curfew where they say you can't go out, you shouldn't be out in public between 5 and 7 p.m. And there was a time, 5 a.m. and 7 p.m. And there was a time a few weeks ago I checked, and there had been up to 19 deaths directly associated with enforcement of these rules. Like, these people weren't like, oh, they have corona and then they couldn't get to the hospital and they died. It's like, no. The policeman's like, what are you doing out here? Beat the person dies. So there's been 19 of that. And then the actual total corona deaths that have been found is about 450. So that is a significant amount of deaths directly from people enforcing it rather than actually dying from it. And then now you have all these other things that, how are you going to actually get the numbers of all these things? So anyway, okay, into the reading. In Burkina Faso, 12 million people, more than half the country's population, will not have enough food to eat this year, according to Isaka Kiemtore, the national director of Compassion International there. Observers say coronavirus-related restrictions are playing a major role in the West African nation's food crisis. Yet Burkina Faso has only 54 confirmed deaths due to the virus as of Tuesday. Globally, starvation is threatening the lives of tens of thousands of children this year, according to the United Nations, and lockdowns deserve much of the blame. As the coronavirus pandemic spread in the spring, major world economies slowed to a crawl, and supply chains in developing countries faltered. Access to medicinal, saying medieval because some of the conditions these people live in are positively medieval. Okay, access to medicinal services became strained or impossible across parts of Africa and Asia. Closed borders and limited travel disrupted humanitarian shipments. During the early months of the pandemic, UNICEF reported low and middle-income nations had seen a 30% decrease in essential nutrition services, or even 75% to 100% during lockdown scenarios. Among the 100,000 families that the Christian aid group Compassion International serves in Burkina Faso, 30,000 are at high risk for malnutrition and starvation. That's up from 3,000 to 5,000 last year. Kiemtore says lockdown restrictions are a major factor in that increase. We have to move much of our intervention into a relief mode, instead of what we've previously been doing, like teaching, he said. We are focusing on child protection, on healthcare, on food. Late last month, medical journal The Lancet published a troubling report calling attention to skyrocketing child malnutrition. Some of the strategies to respond to COVID-19, including physical distancing, school closures, trade restrictions, and country lockdowns, are impacting food systems, the report warned. Researchers predict wasting among children under the age of 5 globally will increase 14%, and the United Nations anticipates an increase of 10,000 child deaths per month during pandemic restrictions. Now, specifically with this one here, this isn't in the article, I'm just giving you a byline here. When you look at the actual rate that children under 5 are dying from COVID itself, compared to these ancillary effects, like just not being able to get regular food, not being able to get medical aid for just other things like malaria that they die from at massive numbers, is absurd. It's that people can't see this is so frustrating to me, and it's just a frustration, and I think this is part from living in different worlds and my background that way, where it's like I can kind of relate somewhat to people complaining about the school situation in the United States of America, and then I also can kind of relate somewhat to knowing people who live in these kind of conditions, and it's tough. Okay, back to the reading. The UN has requested $2.4 billion to provide emergency nutrition to children in need. According to the Lancet report, 4 out of 5 of the affected children live in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Parts of Africa and Asia are also beset by devastating locust swarms this year. In South Sudan, 7.5 million people depend on food aid. Before the pandemic, World Vision was a partner in school feeding programs that served 200,000 children. That's the main meal they would get per day, says Dr. Mesfin Loha, World Vision's national director in South Sudan. When schools closed in early April, the meal program was forced to end. The World Food Program and the Minister of Education began negotiations to implement take-home rations, but Loha said it took 2 to 3 months for the new program to be approved. Now, this is, again, it's not in the article, it's another aside. When you're looking at the institutions that are set up to actually fix and help and aid these people, are they credible institutions? Do they even earn their own money? If it's a situation where even if they're immediate, even if it's like they see there's a problem and they're like, okay, this is a problem that we have and we need to get it done, and they put a plan together in a week and then they actually get it passed in another week, so it's only 2 weeks. Do they have the money to actually do that thing, to actually get those things going? Do they own any facilities or do they have anyone in their direct employ that can actually facilitate these things? But no, even with that extremely fast compared to what it actually is, they don't have the facilities themselves. They have to go outsource that. They have to get the money donated to them for these things. And it's a mess. Better things can be done, I think, with the current technologies that we have. And I think reports like these, people coming to figure this out, people seeing what's happening with the CCP virus and realizing we can't trust that these things are taken care of with this virus that is not anywhere close to as bad as it was actually predicted to be with the 2 million numbers, if you actually believe that was real or if you believe that was fake news. Regardless, this virus could be a lot worse than it actually was. We don't know how it's going to last in the future and things like that, but at least for currently right now, it's not as deadly as it could have been. For sure not as deadly as things that could come to be, things that will probably come along in the near future. Okay, so back to the reading. In March, India's lockdowns trapped many of the nation's 160 million migrant workers in the large cities. Public transportation shut down. Daily wage earners have ration cards only in their home states. So millions set out for home by foot, often carrying children. Vanaja Hyde, it's H-Y-D. How would you say that? Hyde? A journalist who lives in Hyderabad. I guess it's Hyde. I wonder if that has something to do with the Hyderabad name. Okay, joined a WhatsApp group of professionals who organized to help the migrants. We have seen people who walked along with their children for hundreds of miles without food. Some of them said they walked 50 miles without water. Nobody cared for them, she said. We have seen so many little children waiting in the street for food. So yeah, that's the thing. People walk a lot more in the rest of the world than they do in the United States of America. I think people take that for granted. I think it's not just like the massive size of the country and then the car culture. There's something that is very different. I think even if you just take that out, you look at obesity figures versus how much people just walk. If people just walked more in the United States of America, there'd be a different thing. So I think with 50 miles, like I normally walk at least an hour a day, and I need to get my daily walk in after I've done these recordings for today. But yeah, people walk more. So 50 miles, but without water, that's a long time. So it might be hard for people to really imagine how long a 50-mile walk is, but it's rather massive. So think about like Central Park, which is about 2.5 miles long, 51 blocks or 50 blocks or whatever. So imagine walking up and down Central Park, how many times? 20 times, about 20 times. So up, back, up, back, up, back. Or maybe from the top end of Manhattan Island all the way to the bottom, which is like 22.5 miles or something, doing that like almost 1.5 times. So it's a long distance to go. Especially talking about different climate as well. It's not going to be just nice and cool. Chances are it's a hot time. It's tough. It's tough stuff to think about. And so think about that distance. What would get you, if you're hearing this, to consider walking 50 miles with your kids? Or what would get you to think, I mean, some people probably commute that distance for work and things like that. But if you get to that point, imagine just being stranded and having to walk that 50 miles back with your kids. But why would your kids be there? There's different things. There's different things to actually think about how things are in other parts of the world. And I think it's important to think of. Okay, back to the reading. Local governments, fearing that the incoming migrants might carry infection, sometimes met them with chlorine sprays. And I don't know if the chlorine sprays have been shown to. It's not hydrochloroquine. It's a straight chlorine, like chlorine, the stuff that's used to clean pools and things like that. People are just being sprayed with it because that works somehow. I don't know. India has seen 2 million COVID-19 infections and recently surpassed 40,000 deaths. In several Indian states, officials have denied deaths by starvation, but reports of the contrary circulate widely. Stories of migrant mothers killing their children and committing suicide have gone viral on Indian social media. An independent group of developers and academics in Bangalore have identified nearly 1,000 reports of lockdown-related deaths in local media by beginning of July. The leading causes of death were starvation and accidents during migration, followed by suicides and inability to access medical care. Okay, here again, it's talking about an independent group of developers and academics in Bangalore. This is where I'm holding my my hope for the future in, is people going in. I've talked about this in separate videos, how there's some people who do scams out of India, specifically these scams where they do these pop-ups on your computer. Oh, there's something wrong with the computer. Get help on this line. Then you call them and they make you download something and they control what's on your computer and then they get into your bank account. They do things like that. So these crappy people who do these things. Or once they get you to actually pay them, it's just a recurring payment and they get that money. Even if it's just like $40, but they do that to thousands of people and then eventually that $40 can pay the entire salary for everybody who's working there that day. So, or people get paid in commission. But there's no actual system in the United States of America that catches these people, let alone in India, because they have actual different interests and cost-benefit analyses to actually go after these things. They're security enforcement kind of places and want to save face and look a certain way. But independent people can go in and find this information, just how independent people in the West and other places were tracking down these different scammers and things like that, and then scamming them and going into their computers and exposing them. Okay, so this can happen with this too. So Indian authorities might not want to report what is actually going on in full because of different political interests, different appearances, interests. But how does it actually get to actual people to actually find out? By articles like this, by me making videos like this, by these independent groups of people being able to actually do the research and put them out. So that's a positive thing that I'm seeing there. Next, as I was mentioning before, with the actual information, we've seen how panicked people are in the United States of America, yelling at people, screaming at people, oh, you're killing these people, you're doing this and this. People just getting into certain issues, certain psychoses with the information being posted out about this current pandemic. And you see it in that point, and you think, okay, these people, what kind of access to information do they have? What kind of access to healthcare do they assume they actually can get? What kind of access to PPE? Now, I don't say PPP because it's a personal private protection, paycheck protection program. There's that, and then there's a PPE, which is the personal protective equipment. So even both of those, because in the United States of America, a lot of these people have the PPP, the paycheck protection program. So they're getting money, so they're able to actually have some ways to actually care for their families or maintain some kind of level of living. These people don't have that. They don't have the personal protective equipment. So with the fears that you see in people in the West with their access to resources versus if you are living in a place where you can actually consider, I have to walk miles with my kids just to get this little this notification that gets me maybe a bowl of rice and a few tubers a day to feed my 5 or 6 kids. You do that. My husband is stuck in this place and he can't come because he's further than 50 miles. He's on the other side of the country. He took a train there and now the train is closed. Even if he's walking back, it's going to take this amount of time. You have people in dire straits and then they commit suicide. How much access to information or knowledge do they have about this global pandemic? Do they think it's some kind of thing where it's some god or some demon is coming to kill them off? There's many issues that go with the messaging and the things that have been done with this. And it's pretty depressing. Okay, back to the reading. Lockdowns have massive costs, says Jay Richards, a senior fellow at Seattle-based Discovery Institute and co-author of the upcoming book, The Price of Panic. Richards cites the spread of tuberculosis during the pandemic, as well as missed cancer screenings and increased addictions globally. Too many authorities and scientific officials advising the government treated COVID-19 as a one-sided risk. In a May report, representatives from the Red Cross, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and others cautioned against blanket shutdown policies, speaking of those affected by humanitarian crises The report warned that the COVID-19 prevention measures used by developed nations could be potentially harmful to the survival of people in poorer countries. And it says this story has been updated to clarify 7.5 million South Sudanese depend on food aid. So that's it for the article. It says by Sarah Erdos. You can check it out. I think it's a Turkish name, something, or Cypriot. Had an X, had a name like ER, so something ERD and something in there. It just sounds like one of those names. I could be completely wrong. Anyway, but you can check it out. It's World Magazine, the website, worldwng.org. I might leave a link to the article, but you can find other articles about this, and that's a positive thing. The fact you can find other articles about this means this information is coming out. Some of these things are things that I just kind of was thinking was going to happen. Now you're actually seeing there's more research actually being done in it. You're seeing even people in places like the UN and these other international organizations that might have been focused on one thing for different biases and different reasons of what's in their actual. It's not the bailiwick. Bailiwick is that's not a word I should be using here. Let me check. Yes, actually, bailiwick is. I don't know. I'm using like bailiwick, ubiquitous. Why don't I just speak like a normal human being? But I actually do use these words. Like even when I'm thinking in my head, these are the words I kind of think of. I like to kind of get into some of the semantics. Well, this one. Okay, so what is your bailiwick? This is from vocabulary.com. A bailiwick is an area of knowledge in which a person or institution has control or expertise. As in, my bailiwick is international relations. There's a faintly old-fashioned, even pedantic air to the term now. So use with caution. Yeah, so maybe I should use it with more caution. But yeah, so even the UN, like I don't think they're just inherently evil people. They're people who mean good things. But the first thing they mean good for is for themselves personally, and then the people they love and care for, their family and relatives, and then their clan, and their jobs and their institutions. And sometimes it's like, hey, it's actually more beneficial for us to focus on this one issue so we can get more interest and more importance. Because most people are doing jobs that they consider to be important. So if they find there is something about something bad going on in the world that makes them more important, they feel the drive to do as much as possible within their bailiwick, within what they can do. And that could limit them from other things because they're like, oh, yes, these other people might be able to handle it better, but that has nothing to do with us. In fact, showing you that these people are doing it better might show you that what I'm doing is not really useful, that we are actually in a situation where we are no longer needed. I had one of my older videos talking about this, talking about the United Nations, how I was having a conversation with somebody about it, and it was like, why are people so against the United Nations? This was back in like 2015 when I had this realization. It's like, why are people against this thing? Like, look at when it was started. Look at what you're thinking about. This is something that was started in 1945, October 24th, 1945. What was the world like at that time? What was the access to information? What were the plans and things to actually do and to fix things? So the structure, the foundation that it had was based on a different idea of what the world was. That now we finally have the ability to travel, to communicate. And there have been some reports that, they spend a significant amount on travel. And anyway, this is coming to the idea. I was saying, okay, there were all these things. I'll come back to this whole travel thing, where I'm like, okay, look, now we live in a world where many of the things the United Nations was created to actually do can be done due to the advances in technology and the society that we live in, a more globalized world where you can actually find out information about what's happening in a certain location and actually get sufficient sort of aid to that place. But then I started thinking, wait, now that that's already being able to be done, before it was done after the United Nations was created and not necessarily due to the United Nations, then doesn't that make the United Nations themselves obsolete? The World Health Organization, how good were they at actually preventing this pandemic or actually dealing with a pandemic at the start? You hear a lot of objections and people complaining about their leadership and what their leadership actually did. And then a lot of these people, some of these people, are kind of silent when you still hear Tedros Adhanom still giving the talks from the World Health Organization after all that exposure of how he had the dealings with the Chinese Communist Party at the start of this thing. So there's this kind of ideas. And then when it goes to the travel thing, people say, okay, they're spending more on travel than they are on actual certain main issues and diseases or causes that they have within their bailiwick. I'm using that word again. But when that happens, people say, oh, that's a good thing. Yeah, okay, but maybe you don't need to travel as much if you have access to information where you can do these things via Zoom. How many of these things do you have to be on site in person to do it? Versus also with the travel thing, instead of having people localized, why don't you have these things spread out and you have different institutions in different places doing that thing locally? Since you're already going to have to mostly, in general, get this stuff outsourced to those people on the ground. So there's many questions in these things. But My main point with this whole thing, talking about this whole thing, look at what private institutions like the NBA are doing, because they're interested in this small amount of people. And yes, it's $1 million company. Money's coming in to control that stuff. There's a lot of interest in it. But look at the amount of testing and control that they can do over their given area without necessarily involving these international organizations. And does that make them elitist, or is this just people who are interested in it? If the WNBA or if the NBA really cared about Black lives and said, okay, Black people are being disproportionately affected by this, let's actually cancel the season, take all the money we could have gotten for our salaries, we still have savings and things like this, and put that towards setting up these mini little bubbles all over Africa where they can test people, all over Africa and Asia and things like this. They have these relationships with China and say we're going to push for that instead versus actually just having this bubble of ours, or we're just going to pay and get our millions of dollars. What would change with that thing? What is your experience of this? What is your experience from what is actually going to be the effect, the after effect of people looking at how people were treated within this actual process, within this pandemic, in order to deal with the future pandemics and the future steps in a more effective way? Let me know what you think about that. If you enjoy this channel, if you enjoy the content I'm making here, I appreciate you taking time to listen. You can like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell, whether in YouTube or BitChute. There's also links to a merchandise store where there's different things you can purchase from my store. I'm posting things up there. I'm in the process of switching over to an independent store, so there should be more things in there. I think once I get to that point, I shall look into probably making fewer videos, but still keeping the Wednesday, Saturday and Sunday type of posting. So Wednesday and weekends posting, and then I'll try to tie in more of the art and stuff like that with the actual shirts and the merchandise and things like this and art. So anyway, good stuff coming from me. I hope you're doing well in this time. It's challenging for a lot of us, a lot of questions, a lot of things to be actually confused about and worried about and concerned about, but there's also a lot of things to be happy about and optimistic about. And there's a lot of ways for you to help other people if you actually are looking into helping people, which I think most people are. That's it for now. Goodbye.